Okay, welcome back to Ballistic Performance. We have another Sunday morning review with a cup of coffee and an old rifle. So, what we have here today is a pre-64 Winchester Model 70. Let's see if I can spin this around for you so you can get the other side here. So, let's talk about what it is to be a pre-64 Model 70 and why it's so special. For the story of this gun, at least its action, we need to go all the way back to 1898. Famous Paul Mauser perfected his action, his bolt action repeater. He had a series. He started with his brother in 1871 with a single shot black powder, and through iteration after iteration, eventually perfected it with the 1898 that we all know. Went on to serve in World War I, it served in World War II. That action became the basis for the Model 70 that you see here, the Springfield that the U.S. fielded in World War I and II, the Enfield 17. Many rifles have used the Mauser design. And so anyway, yeah, terrific design that has influenced guns even up to today. So why the 64, why the pre-1964 guns are so special is quite a list. Essentially, these guns were hand machined for the most part. Certain things, making barrels, getting a barrel out of a barrel blank, producing an action. There's lots of gross manufacturing steps that are automated, but so many things were hand polished, hand milled in order to fit perfectly. And in 1964, Remington introduced the 700. We all know that rifle as being superbly accurate and reliable, and it has been their cornerstone for decades. But when that gun came out, they had changed several things from previous generations. The front sight was no longer integral to the barrel. The handle on the bolt is no longer forged, and it's a separate piece. Lots of little things that became stamped or just not polished and machined quite as well. And Winchester needed to compete with that. There was no way they could offer the 64, the Model 70 for that kind of price, for the Model 700 price that Remington had. So in 1964, they began changing things significantly. And among the fit and finish and polish, the biggest difference was the controlled feeding, or the claw extractor that was taken off and switched out. And we'll get into exactly how that works. So the biggest difference is no more controlled feeding, no more hand fitted and polished parts. And so the Model 70 is still being made today. They began production in 1936 in New Haven, Connecticut. It stayed there until 2009 when FN bought Winchester. FN is also the owner of Browning and several other companies, and they're Belgian, and they moved production of the 70 to North Carolina, and it has been made there ever since. So still being made, still a wonderful gun. But if you want the original, the hand-fitted, supremely accurate version of it, then it is certainly the 64, and it's sought after for a reason. So let's get this under the light and show you all about it. So this particular rifle is the Super Grade. I don't know if we can spin it around and get that right there. So this is the deluxe, the premier version. The checkering that you see in the fore end of the stock and in the grip section, that's all hand checkering. That's not press fit by a machine. Also the Monte Carlo cheek piece. The recoil pad is not original. Generally, these rifles were equipped with a hard plastic butt plate, and somewhere along the way, people add recoil pads. This rifle is chambered in 30-06, so certainly a relatively stout rifle. Heading up through the rifle here, we have the safety, safe, and fire. The bolt is exceptionally solid. When you pull it back, there's no wiggling anywhere. The travel through the entire throw is just slick. And the reason for that is twofold. We'll pull the bolt out here. There we go. So here we have the bolt. We have this gigantic blued and polished claw extractor. This is partially responsible for the solid feel of the bolt through the action. Pulling the bolt back, this extractor runs through a groove in the receiver for the entire length of the throw. Then as it is exiting the back of the receiver and entering the front, we have another guiding lug back here that helps to stabilize it as well. So you can see on the front, we get it turned around, we have this great big claw extractor, and we have this slot for the ejector. The ejector is just solid and mounted in the receiver so that when the bolt comes back, the ejector comes out that little slot and forces the cartridge away. Now, a person can take this all the way down, and this is still Mauser's design. Pulling the bolt head off, removing the extractor, and then pushing down on the cocking shroud, removing the cocking piece, you can get to the firing pin and the spring and everything. Right here, you can see the serial number that matches the gun, so matching bolt to the gun there. And there's a little knob right there that a person pushes down in order to get the bolt back in. Here we have the serial number. That indicates about 1946 on this gun. Going down the barrel a little farther, these days, rifles are generally free-floated, so to speak. The stock and the barrel do not touch. They are mated at the receiver, and then there is no contact anywhere between the barrel and the stock. And that lets the stock move, distort, do whatever it wants, and it doesn't affect the accuracy of the rifle. When this rifle was made, free floating wasn't as common. Putting the time and energy and skill into bedding the rifle properly to the stock was much more common. So here we have this raised up section milled into the barrel for the front sight, but also for a mounting point. There's a screw that secures the stock through a pillar to the barrel. And that's partially how they are so accurate. The sling swivels here, a swing attachment point, I should say, and here, these are milled pieces of steel. They're not stamped. I don't think there's a stamped piece of steel on this gun. And then if we go all the way out to the front sight, it's a hooded big ramp there. You can see a brass or a bronze section on the front sight. This ramp, I don't know if you can tell, that is milled from a barrel blank. that is not attached later to the rifle. Just one more detail that Winchester put into these guys. So, moving up off of the rifle now, we have this peculiar looking scope and mounts. Now this is, right here we see the markings, this is a Stith brand scope made by Weaver. It's a 4-power fixed scope. Now for a little background, in 1946, when this gun was made, scopes were not as reliable, they were not as commonplace, and they were not as economical. You can see this scope has an adjustment, an internal adjustment, like all scopes do now. In 1946, they didn't all have internal adjustments, and the ones that did weren't always reliable. So a lot of scopes, still holding over from the 1800s and early 1900s, had mounts with external adjustments. So, what you see here is a milled aluminum front mount that is integral to the scope. And then on the rear mount, again, very well milled and finished, we have an adjustment. We have windage adjustment externally on the rear mount, and we have elevation adjustments internally on the scope. So it's pretty cool. It's a bit of a hybrid that incorporates several of the ideas of the time. You can also see that this particular scope has been blued. Now a lot of it's been worn off, but you can see a real pretty blue in that scope as well. It's not just aircraft aluminum that's been parkerized. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on. First, I misspoke and said that the scope and mounts were aluminum. They're actually steel, or they wouldn't have been blued. So there's that. Also, on our bolts, I wanted to kind of explain how controlled round feeding works and why it's so important, at least in Paul Mauser's mind. These rifles were made with troops in mind. This rifle is still a holdover from World War II. It's only 2 years removed from that conflict. So lots of things are still designed with the military in mind. Mauser wanted to know that troops would never have a problem feeding rounds. He wanted to know that they would never have an out-of-battery detonation. They needed to know that the cartridge case would be supported throughout its delivery into the action, and then once it's sitting in battery, when it's ready to fire. And if the case is fully supported, then a person never has to rely on the ammunition maker to be 100% infallible. So Mauser did a lot of different things, and we'll go through them real quickly. So on this Model 70 bolt, the cartridges are sitting in this magazine, and the floor plate of the magazine is pushing them up through the receiver. As they are pushed up into this bolt head. And now, no matter what I want to do with this, well, except for hold it up in the air, this round is secured. When you're bringing the round out of the magazine, putting it into the chamber, there is never a time that the round is not directed and really fully supported by the bolt head. As an example, as a difference here, this is a plunger style, and there's a tiny little extractor right here, and then a ejector right there, and that's it. You can see as soon as I let go. So this system, I mean, you can see how it sits in there. This system relies on the cartridge having a nice cone in the receiver to feed into the chamber. It relies on a couple of different things, but essentially it does not rely on the head of the bolt to keep things smooth. And I may not be doing a spectacular job of explaining this, but suffice it to say, if you have hundreds of thousands of troops fielding millions of rounds, a problem-free design is certainly what you want. Now, we have a couple of other things to talk about here. The trigger is a one-piece, just a sear drop from underneath the striker on the bolt. It is a single stage. I'll see if I can show you. It's very crisp. Not the lightest trigger I've ever pulled, but very, very high quality. No moving parts to speak of. It does not change feel. It does not malfunction. It's just a very simple, very superb trigger. As far as out of battery safeties go, let's say the rifle is not in battery, you can't fire it. Let's say the rifle is partly in battery, still can't fire it. When it gets down to a certain point, let's see, we'll cock this and put it back. Let's say it's right there. Now, pulling the trigger drops the bolt handle, can't fire it. So there are a couple of different safety mechanisms in order to make this rifle more reliable for troops. The other thing that you'll notice, right here is a holdover from a military application. Those are the indents for stripper clips. So theoretically, if there was no scope, this rifle could be loaded with stripper clips, just like a Springfield from World War II. Pretty interesting. So what makes a Pre-64 so amazing and sought after as a collector's item? Everything. The hand-fit stock, the hand-fit action, the superb round control, the feeding, the accuracy of the rifle. Everything about this rifle is well done. And it shows 75 years later, this rifle is still just as accurate and amazing as it was when it was made. So that's the story. 1946 on this particular rifle. Little piece of history with its externally adjustable scope. And yeah, so hope you guys liked it. Like and subscribe and help support. And we'll see you next time.